Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this installment of Epic Insight. This is Brian Lenz, Director of Sales and Strategic Partnerships here at Epic, and I'll be your moderator for today's call. As you all know, it's a tumultuous and confusing time when it comes to managing fiduciary responsibilities. On the regulatory front, uncertainty and inconsistency rule the day at the federal and state levels. In addition to that, litigation is on the rise for fiduciary breaches by retirement plan sponsors, foundations, endowments, and of course their service providers. And as you all know, those fiduciary missteps can be costly, not only as it relates to fines levied, but also to your reputations in the field. So with that in mind, we're privileged to be joined by Blaine Aikin and Dave Palisak of Fi360, an industry leader in all things fiduciary. First on the mic will be Blaine Aikin, the Executive Chairman of Fi360 and CFEX. Blaine is a well-known speaker and author of numerous articles on fiduciary responsibility and investment management, and is the author of the Fiduciary Corner column in Investment News magazine. He's been named to Investment Advisor magazine's IA25 list of most influential people in the investment advisory community, and one of 10 most influential individuals in the 401k industry by RIA Biz. As always, your line will be muted throughout the call, but if you have any questions you'd like us to address at the conclusion of the session, feel free to enter those, and I'll run those by Dave and Blaine. So with that, we'll turn it over to Blaine.
Great. Thank you very much, Brian. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today, and we're kind of going to give you a fast and furious look at the regulatory environment, a little bit about litigation, and then we're going to focus in a bit on the reputational side, which we really think is where the advisor's attention should be placed for the most part. So with that, I think we're going to jump right in, and if we this is a graphic that I like to use that whenever we talk about how the regulatory structure works. And so on the vertical axis, we're showing the duty of loyalty, which of course is closely linked to the idea of fiduciary, but you can really think of it as the regulators being interested in conflicts of interest and ethical conduct. And then across the horizontal axis, we have the fiduciary duty of care, which leads to the required level of competence that's involved here. So when we think about our regulatory structure at the federal level in particular, there's really three levels that we would be speaking of. The first lowest level is that non-fiduciary best interest standard. Now, that's the one that's established by the Exchange Act. It's not fiduciary, as we said, but the SEC, is, I'm sure most of you know, is out there now with their regulation best interest proposal, which would not push up the standard of conduct required for the broker-dealer community to a fiduciary level, but nevertheless, it does push that bar up a bit. So we'll see if this goes through or not. That's very much in play at the moment. At the fiduciary level, we talk about there being the Advisors Act fiduciary obligation, which is in fact considered a best interest fiduciary standard, where you have those obligations to adhere to the fiduciary duties of loyalty and care. That is not being changed by the SEC at this point. It's really, they're sticking with where that stands under the Advisors Act of 40 with no change. And then at the highest level, we have that ERISA sole interest fiduciary standard, where you have to avoid conflicts of interest unless there's a specific prohibited transaction exemption that would allow it. So as you know, under the DOL fiduciary rule, that standard was going to be broadened so that it would bring in more of those who operate at the broker-dealer level and insurance agents as well who provide advice. But that rule has been vacated by the courts, so we find ourselves with waiting again on the DOL as to what they might come out with next. So I guess the bottom line on all of this is to say that these bars tend to move and are uncertain, and as Brian said at the outset, we really can't count on them being too certain. One thing we can say is we want to stay out of that out of compliance zone that's at the bottom. So with that, let's take a look at the litigation side, and this will tell us a little bit about what's happening on that front. And here I want to call your attention to a recent paper that was put out there by Boston College. It was titled 401k Lawsuits, What Are the Causes and Consequences? Really like this paper and suggest you take a look at it, because it boiled down over 450 cases of 401k litigation and came up and said with the conclusion that there really are only three main complaints here: inappropriate investment options, excessive fees, and self-dealing. And a lot of these are actually interconnected. Inappropriate investment options can boil down to the fact that you might have used retail class shares whenever institutional class shares were available. That would be inappropriate because of excessive fees. And if another example might be if there are proprietary funds that are involved, there could be self-dealing in part because of the excess fees involved. So all of this is related, and the overall conclusion, I think, from the study is critically important. It talks about that from the court's perspective, fiduciary's main responsibility is to follow a prudent process in making plan-related decisions, and that ties in closely with really what Fi360 is all about in trying to make sure that we focus on the process side much more so than the outcome side. And we'll have a little bit more to say about that. But I think these lessons from litigation kind of boil it down here to that picture on the right-hand side. This is not all that tough to be compliant. The critical thing is don't be the low-hanging fruit. Pay attention to the prudent processes you have in place, and then try and avoid these three main complaint areas. So let's move from there to try and put this in another perspective, and that's to say, if you kind of think back to that first graphic where we talked about you could be kind of at the bottom left-hand corner, which is the area of non-compliance. That's established by virtue of where those regulatory bars are, and so there's some people that are in that territory, and that's definitely not where you want to be. You can move to the right of that bar and be in the compliant category, and that's where most folks are. But the reality is, if you truly want to have competitive advantage, you want to be on the right end of the bell curve in that exceptional category. And I think the message here would be that we tend to spend too much time worrying about where the regulatory bar is, and not enough time thinking about how do we get to the right end of the bell curve to be truly distinctive in the marketplace based on the services that we provide. So let's look at how you get there next. And that would take us into a study that I wanted to call to your attention from CFA Institute. And this was the Future of Finance approach that they put out there in 2018. And this particular study was called The Next Generation of Trust, a global survey on the state of investor trust. And they surveyed here investors across the spectrum from different parts of the world, primarily in the U.S., but internationally as well. And they found remarkable consistency in the advisor attributes that clients want. And if you look at these, they really zero in on what we talked about in that first graphic. It's talking about ethical conduct and competence. And so each of these particular items tie back to that same thing. And study after study has demonstrated that, in fact, that's what clients want more than anything: trustworthy conduct based on ethical conduct standards as well as the competence levels. So with that, I'm going to turn to the next aspect of this, which is how we get to the actionable part of achieving that level of trust that clients are looking for. And here I want to call to your attention a very good book that goes back to 2001 that I happened to come across. It's called The Trusted Advisor. This equation is one that I really like. They spelled out here in this relationship that trust is really a function of credibility, reliability, and intimacy, which you can also think as a level of client engagement. And so each of those things is additive. The more that you can get in the way of demonstrating credibility, reliability, and achieving client engagement, the further up the trust scale you are. And what we've done here on the right-hand side is to kind of recompose that original graphic to say, if we just kind of set aside the regulatory bars and just think about where we want to be, it's in the upper right-hand corner. So credibility, reliability, and intimacy help to get you there. But what takes you further away from that would be conflicts of interest or self-orientation. So if we can replace client orientation for self-orientation, we're ahead of the game. That would be climb up on the loyalty curve as opposed to down it. And stop and think about how this equation works. You know, additive in the numerator, but you have self-orientation or conflict being a denominator. So in the book, they talk about how if you think about operating on a scale of 1 to 10 for credibility, reliability, and intimacy, with 10 being the best, you can get a maximum score here of 30 in the numerator. But even on a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of what I would put of self-orientation, so low number is bad. In self-orientation, the self-orientation, if you had that at a value of say 2, and recognizing that self-orientation is bad, you've cut that numerator in half. So I don't know whether it makes any sense really to go to a 10-point scale, because somebody either trusts you or they don't. And if you've got conflicts of interest and people are questioning your objectivity, really your numerator values kind of evaporate pretty quickly. So this kind of gets to the point of how do you build credibility, reliability, and client engagement. And these sorts of things run back to such things as on the credibility side, it can be with respect to the designations that you might hold. And CFA Institute actually did a pretty good study on these designations as well, demonstrating that there is added pricing power associated with having designations. It also gets to the fact that if you specialize in certain areas, that is very helpful. Reliability can be a function of the technology that you apply, the processes that you have in place, and so we try to focus on having replicable processes. And on the intimacy side, a lot of this has to do with client engagement, perhaps through your communication skills, and as well as your communications policies and interactions that you might put into place on a regular basis. Whenever Dave walks a little bit through the mechanics of how this can play out from a technology perspective, I think I'd like for you to be thinking about how this plays into this equation. So I'm going to wrap up with my comments with one more slide where we kind of lay out the fact that Fi360 was actually created with these thoughts in mind of how you progress up the excellence scale, and it has everything to do with credibility, reliability, and engagement. So here we have at the bottom level, whenever Fi360 was established, one of the very first things we did was to develop handbooks that are called the Prudent Investment Practices Handbooks that define what are the fiduciary obligations that an investment advisor or an investment manager or investment steward has, and we substantiated those law and best practices. From that, then, we developed the AIF program, Accredited Investment Fiduciary, to demonstrate mastery of those prudent investment practices. And so now it's gotten to a place where we have over 10,000 AIF designees. It is one of the most widely used, particularly for those that have institutional clients like retirement plans and foundations and endowments and so forth. The AIF is all about prudent investment practices and how to manage that, and it is something that if you haven't taken a look at, certainly encourage you to do that. So when we think about the first two boxes here from the bottom up, this is all about education, so we want to make sure that people understand what their obligations are. The next box is Fiduciary Focus Toolkit. we put together the technology to efficiently apply the prudent investment practices. So this moves from credibility building into the reliability stage. And I won't spend any time on that because Dave's going to demonstrate how that plays out. And then at the highest levels on the AIFA and the CFEC certification side, this is to move on up from credibility and reliability into what I would call the certification or engagement side to actually assess conformity of the organization to the prudent investment practices and be able to be certified to those standards. So this is basically the model upon which Fi360 is based, and really ties back nicely to this whole concept of trust building. So with that, Dave, I would like for you to kind of march us through the tools. Dave is our Vice President of Product Management. He is really the brains behind the Fiduciary Focus Toolkit and primary architect over the years. So with that, Dave, take it away.
Thank you, Blaine. I'd like to take the next 15 minutes or so and walk you through a little bit of the software. We're not going to have time to cover everything today, but really want to focus in on one of the elements that Blaine hit on, which was following a prudent investment process, especially as it relates to generating plan monitoring reports on the investment. So with that context, let's go ahead and jump in and let me give you a quick tour. So right now we're on our main client dashboard, and this would be, the list of plans or organizations that you are working with. And a large part of the software, as I said, is really designed to help you efficiently produce the ongoing plan monitoring reports, including the investment due diligence against some established watch list process. And as we looked at a watch list process, and if you've seen our handbooks in the past, you know that there is a kind of a minimum set of criteria that we recommend you at least look at when evaluating an investment option. And we have taken that minimum set of criteria, and one of the data points available in our software is what we call the Fi360 Fiduciary Score. And this is a kind of metric that takes into account those basic fiduciary principles and can be used and is used in process today a lot by investment advisors, both monitoring 401k plans and looking at it from an individual wealth account perspective. Our system, though, does allow for you to configure your own due diligence criteria if you wanted to supplement the Fi360 score, or you wanted to come up with a different due diligence process. So let's take a quick look at the Fi360 score, and then I'll show you how you could also configure your own, and then we'll take a look at the plan monitoring area. So let's just go ahead and pick one of these funds. This is just a sample search that I just did on a basic plan menu, and you can see one of the main attributes of the score is its simplicity and color coding. It'll range from 0 to 100, 0 being the best, 100 being the worst. So let's just go ahead and take a look at the first fund on here that has a score of 72 right now. Just to get a sense for how this works, this is going to show you the historical trends of this fund over time. So you're not just looking at what the score is as of June 30th, but you're able to quickly identify any trends, both good, consistent, or it's improving, or in this case, maybe it's slightly declining and it's been kind of stable here in the third quartile for a number of years. As far as what goes into the score, this is going to outline each of the score criteria. I won't go into super detail on this now, although all of the due diligence criteria and methodology is fully transparent. You can download the exact guide for how this is calculated. But here you're at least seeing a basic idea of the criteria that's looked at, from tenure to assets, to composition, to expense, to risk-adjusted performance, to trailing performance, and whether or not the fund accrued shortfall points for a particular area. So here, most of the shortfalls here are related to risk-adjusted performance and trailing performance. And what we do is we'll take all these individual shortfall points, we total those up. So this fund had 32 shortfall points, and then we say, how does that compare to all the other options in small value? In this case, it falls in about the 72nd percentile. So out of 400 or so different options, there were 72% of them were scored better. So in general, if this fund were in a given plan, most advisors would have this on their watch list. Maybe something you're still keeping, but at least you're monitoring and documenting what you're doing about that. If you were searching for a new fund, in many cases, this would likely get weeded out from a search criteria basis. So that's just a quick little backup on the score. In addition to some of the views you can see online, a lot of the uses of Fi360 are for producing client-facing reports, whether that be investment fact sheets, which is what we're looking at right here, client monitoring report, which we're going to take a look at, or a proposal report, or a fund comparison report. So there's a number of different reports available, which we'll look at a few today, that can be used both internally by the advisor and for distribution with your plan sponsors or investment committees. So in addition to screening here, you could screen for new investment options if you're looking for a new large cap blend or new foreign large blend to implement. And you can go in and manipulate all the search criteria. Just for the benefit of today, we're not going to go too deeply into this. But if you used Morningstar today or some other fund research tool, hopefully you would see a lot of value in potentially using the Fi360 screener, either instead of or in addition to that. Let's go ahead and take a look back now at your general book of business, and let me show you one other area which would let you configure your own watch list criteria. So we call these watch list triggers, and these essentially, if you go back to the process, what our software allows you to do is to set up a defined watch list process or watch list trigger that's going to be used to monitor the investment options. And that could be, again, as I mentioned before, something as simple as just using our Fi360 score, less than or equal to 50. Maybe that's your only criteria, and we have a number of advisors that do just that. Or you could implement essentially your own process where you're looking at 10-year return and beta and information ratio and whatever other batting average, what other metrics you feel are important, and you can specify the thresholds you feel are appropriate, and you can use this custom set of criteria to put funds on and off watch. So again, either way, we're helping you establish this prudent process, a very repeatable process for monitoring the investment options. And it's up to you, again, whether you want to use the Fi360 score or not. So with that in mind, if we take a look at the client's dashboard here, there's kind of two main ways you can look at your book of business. You can look by client to kind of get a quick view across all of the plans, see which ones currently, how many funds are on watch inside that plan based on the criteria in their IPS. And you can get a quick view for the current status of their monitoring report. So again, a lot of the report interactions help you to efficiently produce these ongoing quarterly monitoring reports to ensure you stay in compliance. You could quickly sort here to say, find me the plan right now, which has, the most amount of funds on watch, because maybe this is one we want to pay special attention to or do more quickly, after quarter end. So viewing by client is one kind of key way to interact with the system. The other is by investment, which for those of you that have a more standardized way of monitoring investments, whether you're serving in a 338 capacity or you in general are using similar funds and making similar recommendations across plans, this is a nice way for you to look at your exposure to a given fund. So here, for instance, 14 clients hold PIMCO. None of them are on watch right now. Versus if we sort differently here, we can also identify maybe our most at-risk investment. So here, IB International is in 12 clients and 9 of it have it on watch, and we own 2 share classes. And from here, you could drill into IB. You could better understand why it's on watch. You can see what clients hold it, what share classes they own, what watch list process is being assigned. And you could even open this up to understand what is failing the IPS. So what's causing this fund to be triggered in the system. So it's a nice tool for you to use internally across your plan. So then go in and document any of your investment due diligence or investment notes, which will then appear as part of your ongoing plan monitoring reports. One thing I didn't mention here, but just you might be wondering where all the plan data comes from, and one of the reasons we're on the call today with Epic is because you can integrate your plans with Fi360. So any of the plan business you have there can be hooked up so that, one, if you're a brand new user, they would show up here up top for you to automatically import them from the partner, in this case from Epic. So it would import the plan, the underlying holdings and balances, and then on an ongoing basis, once they've been created, the investments within here will automatically be updated on a monthly basis. So in terms of producing your ongoing plan and monitoring reports, it makes that process a lot more efficient. And maybe let's take a few more minutes here and just look at a sample plan. So here, let's go ahead and take a look at Applied Sciences for our example here, which has 3 funds currently on its watch list. So inside of a given organization, you can have a 401k plan, a defined benefit plan, profit sharing plan. Again, the system is also used by many advisors, not just in the plan space, but also working with individual clients or foundations or endowments or trusts. But let's just take a look at the monitoring report history. So this is going to log all of the ongoing monitoring reports you've produced for this organization. And let's just take a look at the Q2 report, which is the one that we're currently working on. And this is just to provide you a little bit of a high-level view. This is going to show you the kind of overall summary of the plan lineup. You can quickly see how many funds are currently on watch. These are really the 3 that you need to review right now, just to ensure, as Blaine said earlier, are there high expenses? Are you properly looking at the investment compared to other peers that might be available to you? So while you have 14 total funds, and the report does summarize them all, we do focus on the 3 that are flagged from a watch list perspective. We also calculate this overall weighted score for the plan. So this is telling you that across all the investments, based on the assets you have invested in them, the overall asset weighted score is a 24, which is good. Again, lower the better. This is one of our more widely used charts that you'll see in our reports. We call it the scatter plot, which a lot of advisors and clients alike love to see. And it's really showing you the current score along with one of our trending scores. So you could look at any time period that's appropriate to you. And this is you want to be towards the origin, telling you that you have a good score as of, in this case, 6/30, and you also have had good scores over the last 5 years. As your funds start going, up and out the chart, that's telling you it's a fund that's on watch now and it's been on watch for a while. So those are much more likely, candidates for watch list or candidates for replacement. And we also do offer a proposal report that really shows this chart side by side. So if you're prospecting for a new plan, you effectively can, position these 2 charts side by side. Here's what you currently have. Here's what I'm proposing, and it's really easy to see a good versus bad plan from an investment standpoint, at least, graphically on this one chart. And then from there, you can dig into the details as needed. So I know we were trying to stick around 30 minutes. I think we're almost at that time. I wanted to make sure we allow some areas for questions here, and maybe we could jump over to Brian to help facilitate that. And then while we're doing that, also one additional comment here for those of you that wanted some more information on some of the items that Blaine talked about. This link here, we recommend you taking a look at both from an advisor perspective and also something you may want to share with your plan sponsor or investment committee clients. And then for those of you that want to get some more information on the toolkit, again, we only covered a really small snippet of it today. Best point of contact here is Matthew Pettick, whose email and phone number listed below.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, Dave, and thanks, Blaine. If anyone does have questions you want me to run by Blaine or Dave, feel free to enter those now in the GoToWebinar questions panel there. In the meantime, want to reiterate one thing Dave mentioned. At Epic RPS, we do have an integration with Fi360. So if your plans are record kept with us, we feed the data over automatically to Fi360, just saving you time of initial data entry of that plan and that lineup, as well as any ongoing changes. So if you do want to leverage that and you're already a Toolkit subscriber, just let your service rep at Epic know and we can get that turned on for you. So a couple questions have come in. Maybe the first one is for Blaine. Obviously, now that the fiduciary rule is officially dead, and grumblings of who might pick up the torch and what that might look like, without making any promises, do you have any kind of inkling of what we might see next from any regulatory entity as it relates to retirement plans and fiduciary status, fiduciary rules, etc.?
It's a great question, and it's one that inquiring minds want to know. It's very hard to predict what's going on, but I think we can say a few things. Number one is that let's look at each of these cases. With respect to the SEC, they have a proposal out there now on that the regulation best interest. The comment period closes in August 7th. Following that, they will go through the process of refining what they had proposed, and then they will go back out for undoubtedly another comment period. And so if everything went swimmingly well, you would be looking at 2020 before you saw a rule finalized, because it would take that long to get through everything, and that's assuming that there is not litigation. So I think there is a chance that that will happen. I do think that title regulation part is something that will come down the pike at some point, where you won't be able to call yourself an advisor unless you register as a fiduciary investment advisor. On the DOL front, I think it's very interesting. As you said, the DOL rule is dead, but kind of not dead, because there is an aspect of the best interest contract exemption that can still apply. So those firms that decided to use that best interest contract exemption to allow them to take variable comp as long as they sign on as a fiduciary, that still is available out there. And that actually is useful for level fee advisors too, because if you're working with a plan, you can do rollover advice and still make more of the money when whatever it rolls to the IRA if you jump through those hoops. The states are a wild card. We're seeing activity on that side. But I guess the last thing I would say is keep your eye on the idea of the impartial conduct standards. That was actually a phrase that was brought out in the DOL rule, and it's one that I've heard from FINRA, the SEC, and the DOL, and basically what they're pointing back to is the same thing the court said. What they're looking for are prudent processes, which again ties back to kind of what we teach and profess in the things that we bring out there. So that's as fast as I can tell that story.
I appreciate that, Blaine. Some good insight there, and we won't hold you to it.
All right,
Dave, this one probably bounces back to you. As it relates to investment policy statements and screening, obviously index-based funds and target date funds are pretty large recipients of assets in retirement plans. Can you share any thoughts or kind of best practices on how those might differ from screening an actively managed fund that fits into a style box? And do you have any tools that specifically address those differences between the two.
Sure. Yeah, and while I'm answering that, I'll bring up one thing on screen for us to take a look at. So with respect to the Fi360 score, part of the initial desire when building that was to come up with a set of criteria that would apply regardless of investment type or investment vehicle as just kind of fundamental principles. And as such, the score is available on basically every investment type. So regardless of peer group and regardless of mutual fund, ETF, CIT, stable value. But having said that, we know that from a watch list perspective, that may not be the best criteria to always utilize. So when you're building an IPS in terms of what goes into your IPS from a due diligence perspective, you can configure differently the criteria you're going to use to put funds on and off watch based on actively managed funds, passively managed funds, money market stable value, and target date. So for instance, a lot of cases on the money market side, you may not actually have an automated watch list process. You may still go through a similar review, but you're not going to be flagging money market funds necessarily on every report. Same thing for a target date, because generally you're selecting a family as a whole there, and it's a little bit more of a holistic review than literally reviewing the 2025 funds by itself. So just like for passive too, we have seen other advisors that implement a different due diligence process that focuses more on maybe tracking error or information ratio for passive funds. So you can configure these accordingly and have different criteria that are being used to put them on and off watch. So that for many of our other advisors, that has allowed them to be a little bit more, to offer more differentiation by those types.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And a softball for you, just practically, can you generally ballpark what it might cost an advisor to get up and running on the toolkit, and are there any describe any limitations on number of reports and how quickly these things are updated after quarter end?
Yeah, so starting with the investment data, all of our investment data is sourced from Morningstar. We update monthly, although the monitoring reports generally are on a quarterly cadence. But from like an investment research standpoint, you could get month-end information, for example. And we always update at least by the night of the 6th business day. We updated the night of the 5th business day last month. But 6th is typically our night, so all the investment data is updated then. Some CITs and separate accounts report to Morningstar a month late, so they would be a month behind, but that's becoming a smaller and smaller portion. So that's kind of the case on the investment data side. As far as pricing, there's kind of two models. If you're just a single advisor kind of operating in your own office, our typical retail price is $2,400 a year, which provides you and a staff member access to the tool. If you're in a bank trust department or a firm that has more users or more advisors, then we work with you on more of a custom pricing model. And that's something that Matt Pettick can follow up with you on.
All right. I think that does it for today, guys. Appreciate the time, Blaine, Dave, and thanks to both of you and Fi360. And thanks for everyone on the phone for making some time for this webinar. We'll look forward to seeing you next month and appreciate your time and partnership. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.